Welcome back to the show. You are so awesome for being here and showing up week after week. And if you are just joining us for the first time today, you're really in for a treat. I have on the show one of my favorite clients of all time, the miraculous Terry Lee. This man is a person who's really made a big impact on me. You know, it's funny because as much as he was my client, I really learned just so much from working with him. And I know that you are going to learn a lot. Terry, thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, thanks, Caneel, so much for having me. Thanks for those words, and I'm really excited to kind of chat with you.
Oh man, I always look forward to it so much. I remember the first time that we met was back when you were at MeUndies, COOing. And I came in, I met you, I met the others on your team, and we stayed in touch for a while. I didn't end up coaching you when you were there, but remember how many times roughly we got together before you decided to become my client?
Yeah, it was a couple of times. It was more than a couple of times, and I mean, thank you again for your patience and for sticking with me. And it's a testament to your persistence and patience. And I'm so glad that we were able to kind of continue that relationship after we initially met. So thank you.
Well, you are welcome. As and thank you for kind of your persistence because it is so unlike me to see a prospective client more than once, like ever, especially if I'm getting in the car to do so. Like that's very rare. I would usually just, one meeting, okay, either you're in or you're out, I'm moving on. But with you, you kept finding great ways to invite me back and meet you for coffee and whatever. And I remember even telling you at the time, I'm like, I literally don't know why I keep showing up. I don't know, but I trust that it's for the right reason. And then years later, you finally became my client. And I was so excited to work with you. It all
Yeah,
paid off.
yeah, same. And I think it was like the perfect timing, even though it probably took a lot longer than both you and I expected. And I'm just really grateful for all the things that I've learned, in the time that we spent together. But then even moving forward after those sessions, I think a lot of the lessons and things that we talked about keep popping up, and I'm learning them on deeper levels, which is cool.
Mm, so wonderful. Well, I'd love really for you to share today about the journey that you've been on. I've certainly been inspired watching you grow over these past few years, and the depth with which you've really taken on your personal growth work and your really extreme commitment to being open and learning and growing. And I think you're an excellent role model for what is possible there. So you and I chatted a bit before the show, and I'm hoping that you'd just be welcome to be as revealing as you possibly are willing to be, and lead through example here. So I'd love to just hear about your journey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, why don't I just give, if it's okay, maybe just like a high level overview, and then whatever area that we find is interesting, we can kind of dive into further if that works.
Perfect.
Cool. So maybe a good place to start is even slightly before like I graduated from college and started my career. I had grown up playing soccer my whole life, and the reason why I think this is relevant is because soccer was like an all-consuming hobby for me. I don't even think it was a hobby. It was like it was my life, and so I
Mhm.
played it as much as I could. I would practice all year round, play on multiple teams, and there was just this one singular goal that I had, which was to play in college at the Division 1 level.
Mhm.
And fortunately, I was able to walk on to the team at the University of Notre Dame, and that was an incredible kind of experience. But so often in life, at least from what I found, is that you achieve a goal and then there's always more that you want. And so as soon as I joined the team, it was this mentality of like, okay, I need to start, I need to score goals, I need to make a positive impact for my teammates and for what we're building together in this program. And I unfortunately didn't reach those goals that I had envisioned. And what was really humbling was because I had such a clear vision of what that would look like. Like I would literally visualize, me scoring goals or me having this like active, significant role on the team, and it just never came to fruition. So that was really kind of humbling in a sense. And the reason why I bring this up is because it's almost reflective of like how, I feel like the last few years have gone. So fast forward, after I graduated from school, I spent a few years working at Johnson and Johnson, and then I had the opportunity to move out to LA and join this company called MeUndies, which is an underwear e-commerce brand, and was fortunate enough to join in a COO role. We grew to $50 million in 3 years. It was a lot of fun, a lot of growth in a short amount of time. And I think if I'm being honest with you, after those 3 years, I just had a real, I wouldn't even call it confidence. I think there was a lot of arrogance that was kind of beneath it, just in terms of my own ability and how much I had made an impact. So it was a lot of kind of focus on me and my capabilities. And so coming out of that, I was like, look, I'm ready to kind of start my own journey and start my own company. And so I started a beauty company called Panacea. And I started it with a couple other partners. And unfortunately, kind of similar to the soccer story, it didn't pan out the way that I had envisioned. And I think it was this reminder of like, sometimes like results aren't everything. And really just like brought to kind of my attention, like areas that I needed to kind of grow in, to kind of move forward in my life. So maybe we'll just kind of pause there, but I don't know. That's kind of been the journey over the last few years.
Well, I was laughing at a little bit at the beginning of you telling this story as you described being on the soccer team. And by the way, this seems to be a common thread amongst the executives, at least I've met, is some really big commitment to a sport early in their life. So, Notre Dame was obviously a fantastic school, fantastic sports school. I have to imagine that was a really big deal. But then you get there and then the goalpost keeps moving and the bar gets higher. And I'm laughing because what is your Enneagram type?
Type 3.
Yeah. And so this is kind of, there are themes here that were present in a lot of the work that we did together in your coaching work about, kind of on the darkest days, maybe it's never enough. I'm never doing enough. There's always more and more and more I got to do. In your words, like you call this striving.
Yeah, for sure. Striving definitely comes to mind. And it's this mentality of like, if I do good, I get good, and results will come my way. And it's great, and it feels great. It feels great for both my ego and for myself when that kind of formula works. But when I feel like I'm doing good and not getting the results that I quote unquote deserve or have earned, that's where you start to get really shaken up.
What's it like then?
Well, I think it just really challenges this kind of very deeply ingrained kind of formula or like way of living that I've adhered to. And so when it doesn't go according to plan, you kind of just ask yourself, well, maybe it's me, maybe I'm not doing it the right way. And there's just a lot of like insecurity that I think arises. And, look, I'm not going to begin to say it's right or wrong, but I think one thing that I've learned is that I've tried to shift my focus and mentality from striving. And the way I define striving is trying to do things that are outside of my control or control things that are outside of my control. And I've tried to shift more to a mentality of striding. And striding for me is just going at the pace that I've been graced for. And it's letting things come to me. It's very much about pull momentum, where like I'm getting pulled into like what I've been called to do. What my life is supposed to kind of embody and look like, versus me like trying to knock down every door, do it all on my own effort and my own timing.
What's the difference in how that feels to do striding versus striving?
I think I'm still learning it, to be honest. So I definitely haven't mastered it by any means, but I do think that there is a distinct difference on many levels. And striving, and it's hard to recognize until you're out of the striving mentality, but it's a lot of hard work. It's basic. The analogy I would have is, imagine pushing up a boulder like uphill, and every little bit or inch that you move that boulder up, it's dependent on your effort. And the line that I keep thinking of is like, life isn't dependent on me. Life isn't dependent on my ability. And so then that, I think, encapsulates what striding means, which is, yes, there is work, there is commitment, there are these things that I have to show up and do, but it just comes more naturally. It's like almost I'm along for the ride versus like the ride being dependent on me.
That's a really big change. Really big change. Is there some moment in your life or um, something you were confronted with even that like had you really take stock and be willing to experiment with this totally different way of being? I know like letting go of the idea that we can control things outside of our control can be really scary when that's been our MO. So like what, I don't know if it was scary for you, but I'd love to just hear about the turning point and how you even came to these realizations.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think it was this one aha moment and then, flip of a switch, it's done. I think there's definitely been a few poignant moments, but it's been a process and it's been a journey. Because the way I think about it is that I've been operating in this mindset, this striving mindset, if we want to oversimplify, for most of my life. And so to think that I can kind of undo or unlearn that, at a moment's notice, I think is a little bit unrealistic. And so I think that's also given me a lot of kind of grace and freedom and kind of patience with myself of just saying that I don't need to have it all figured out today. And it's just more about making small improvements and just, sorry, that's kind of the achiever in me. It's not even about improvements. I think it's just more about recognizing the difference and not trying to beat myself up for one way or the other and just be like, hey, I feel like I'm striving in this moment. What would striding look like? Back to your original question in terms of what that moment consisted of, there's one in particular that stands out, and it actually happened almost 2 years ago. I had mentioned before that I started Panacea with two other partners. One of them was my brother, and the other was a good friend of mine. And unfortunately, I think to put it simply, we just it wasn't the right team to build this company together. And, I think there was a variety of reasons, and it was no one's fault in particular. It just was like the timing and how it all came together. And so I made this decision. In my mind, I thought I was falling on the proverbial sword and kind of, going down with the ship because the business wasn't doing well. I knew in my heart of hearts that it was a matter of time before we had to shut down the company. So in my mind, I was like, hey, I'm going to let you guys go so you can pursue other things while I try to figure this out. And if it doesn't get figured out, then I'll be the one to kind of, take the blame. So anyways, that happens. I made the decision to kind of let them go. And it really kind of blew up in my face for many reasons. It led to a fallout with, in terms of a friendship, in terms of my brother. He and I were best friends up until that point, and obviously caused a lot of kind of conflict within our family. And so I had made this decision and saw the repercussions of that decision. And it was kind of one of those like rock bottom moments where I was like, a lot of the things that I held dear to my life in terms of friendships, my brother, family, I saw them kind of exploding in front of me. And I was like, oh man, this is a big wake up call. And so I realized that amongst many things, I had to let go of the way in which I was kind of living my life and the way that I was interacting with people and, kind of building relationships and just have to kind of, I'm struggling to kind of find the words, but I had to just really, I think for lack of a better way of saying it, I think I just had to let go and just kind of almost start over in a way. I don't know. It's hard to kind of describe, but that was the feeling that I had.
You had to let go of your own brother and a friend. Yeah. And impact. So now it sounds like, it's almost like if I were to rebuild myself, something like that, what would that look like? So that level of discomfort opened up the possibility for change.
Yes. And I think it was one of those things, just to build on what you said, it was one of those things where I had to, it's almost like I had to be shaken up so much, like almost to the core, to recognize and be aware of these things that I needed to kind of address personally. So as much as I at the time thought it was like, oh, well, it's my brother or it's this business partner or my friend, they're not the right partners for me, and trying to rationalize it, what I was covering up was a lot of the insecurities and things that I needed to work on with myself. And so as soon as I started to kind of recognize that and honor that and admit to that, I think that started the process of like, hey, this is these are areas that you've identified that you need to work on, and just want to kind of take a different approach moving forward, I guess, is probably the simplest way to put it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a crisis moment, which I think is when a lot of us find, I know for myself, this has been true, in those crisis moments, that's the time where I have so little to lose at that point, because there's hardly anything left, it feels like, that I'm able to let things go that I never thought I'd be able to let go of before, or do things that seemed like terrifying before, and now I'm willing to do them. Even if something as simple as I will begin to say no to people who expect something of me. That was a big thing that I had to learn. That was hard. But it became very easy once confronted with like the discomfort of not doing it was greater than the discomfort of continuing to do it.
Yes, wow, that resonates for sure.
I heard you say a word, and I'd love to trace back in and hear what this word means to you. I heard you say grace, and give yourself grace, which sounds like it is what you've done in my understanding of that word. But I'd love to hear how you understand that word, and what relevance you think that has for leaders today.
Yeah, for sure. It's a word that I think in growing up, more or less, like I heard it in the church, and my family's Christian in terms of our background, and it was kind of one of those words you like hear in church, or like the song like Amazing Grace comes to mind, and you just kind of hear it in kind of moments. But it wasn't a word that like I fully kind of, or I don't even think I fully understand it. I think there's many levels, but I don't think I started to really understand what grace looked like, at least for myself, until the past couple years. And I think the best way I would define grace is just being kind to yourself. And I think that there's this mentality, at least from my own personal experience, and I imagine it is somewhat systemic with like other leaders or type A people, like people who are really achievers or people who are really kind of ambitious with different aspects of their life, where you're your own worst critic. You always want more. We talked about this mentality where you achieve something, and then instead of celebrating it, you're automatically setting your eyes on the next thing. And the sports analogy that I would use is that you see an athlete, or you see a team, or you even see a coach who wins a Super Bowl, or who wins like the national championship, which in sports is the pinnacle. There's no higher moment than that. But then they're interviewed in the post-game interview, and the coach or the star athlete goes, hey, this is great, but I can't wait till next year to win another championship. And there's nothing wrong with that mentality, but I think that is just how many of us are wired to operate and to approach our life. And so I think when I think about this concept of grace, it's not necessarily setting lower, less ambitious goals. It's not putting in any less work, but it's just giving yourself kindness and just being understanding of yourself in the same way that I would be for other people. And I just saw that there was this misalignment or inconsistency where I would be very understanding and very kind to other people, but when it came to myself, I would beat myself up, even on little things like, hey, you're supposed to get up at 5 a.m. Today you slept in, quote unquote, and it was, ends up being 6 a.m. and you're beating yourself up, or I'm beating up myself for that, right? So it shows up in little ways, but naturally the little things are the big things in our life. And so that's just been an evolution for me, and I think one that I'll continue on, which is just giving myself grace and giving myself kindness and the patience and the rope to make mistakes and be human and kind of all these things.
Oh, I love this so much. My daughter's middle name is Grace, by the way.
Oh, that's cool. I
Yeah,
love that.
I love it too. um, so I'm hearing you say that in the past you might have made yourself a villain. So the people on this who've been watching this or listening to the show for a while are familiar with the drama triangle. They're familiar with hero and victim and villain. And if by the way, you're a listener and you haven't yet heard about those concepts on this show, get started by going back to episode number 5 and number 6 and number 7. Get started by going back to episode number 6 and number 7. And we also had a special episode all about the villain character, which is the one I'm hearing Terry would go into sometimes with himself. And that was episode number 14. That was episode number 14. So I'm hearing you say, no, that's not true. 13? Okay. And that was episode number 13. And I'm hearing you say, okay, I like to wake up at 5. That's when I'm guessing you go to the gym. I know you're a big worker outer. But I get up at 6 and then I beat myself up for it and I'm a bad guy. I should. Ouch, ouch, ouch. I'm curious, where would you go on the drama triangle after that? Would you stay in villain for a long time? Would you hero yourself? Would you go into victim? Or would you shift?
I think all 3 of those roles really resonate, but I think the one that resonates the most is probably the hero. And
how do you like to hero?
I think it shows up in a lot of ways, and probably ways that I'm not even aware of yet. But I think one was that we talked about a bit before is just how when I made this decision to hero and let go of my co-founders and try to build Panacea by myself, I think that was as much of a hero example as anyone can have. And it was this mentality of, hey, I'll fall on the sword. I'll take this on myself. You guys go pursue other things. And it was just this mentality of like, oh, I'll try to take on more than I'm capable of. And I think that's very much the hero mentality, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, I'll fix it. I'll save it. I'll solve it. And I'll maybe even a little bit, I hear follow my sword. I hear like maybe there's even a little bit of martyr, like a combination of victim and hero. Like I'll make this sacrifice because I'm the one who can do it. I'm the one who can save. Totally. Yes. So familiar. Great. So I'd love to, sorry. Thank you so much for sharing about some of the arc of your growth journey in recent years. And knowing you as I know now, I just want to share that I've seen you shift like at a cellular level. Your nervous system is different. And like your level of calm, even your speed, the way you hold eye contact, like the relaxation in your muscles is different. And feels like there's just like so much more space when we talk from compared to before, and you were already a very engaging, spacious person, but there was more of this sense of urgency. And your level of presence is just, it's off the charts, I'm sure. And I know people see that and feel that in you. And it's partly why you're a great leader. So I'd love to hear about kind of 2 of these different roles. So you've held the role of COO, and you've also now been founder CEO. And let's first dive into the COO role. This is a role, by the way, many CEOs and founders, as I'm sure you know, for them, finding the right COO is like the silver bullet that's going to save them from all people and culture and process problems, all the stuff that is like really weighing them down, and they don't want to do it. So they're often looking for that panacea, that perfect COO, you're one of these that's been in high demand because you're successful. So can you share with some of our maybe aspiring COOs or junior COOs, what are some of the things you learned along the way, and what advice would you give?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think first off, thank you for those words. Super kind, and it means a lot, especially coming from you. And when I think about the COO role, I think it's very much about finding a complementary partner to the CEO. So I think so much of it is fit. I
Mm.
think it's also about having alignment and shared vision and values. And I'll be honest, I got so lucky in terms of the two other partners that I worked with at MeUndies. It was definitely not my own doing. It was very much like Brian, who was the CEO of MeUndies at the time, and Jonathan, who is the founder and now the current CEO. We just had a really good working dynamic that just organically worked without us having to try. And I think looking back, that's something that I didn't fully recognize just how organic and seamless it was, because I tried to recreate it, and almost like force it, if you will, later on at Panacea. But the advice I would have is just understanding that the role at its simplest level, because I think when we think about C-suite titles and even job descriptions and roles and responsibilities, we can think of pages of like what that looks like. But I think at its simplest level, it's about being a complementary partner to the person who is running the business. And I think if we're talking about it in terms of title, it's the CEO. And I think to just build on that, I think how I've always approached the COO role is to understand the vision from the CEO or the founder and translate that into like tangible next steps that we can take, every day. So like small little steps that we can take toward achieving that vision. And so it's very much an execution role. And the other thing that comes to mind, and it was a learning process, was it's a role that requires a lot of humility,
Mm.
because you're going to be operating behind the scenes, may not be as front facing. It's not about you. It wasn't about me at MeUndies. And my posture when I was in um, a great headspace was, how do I help John, help Brian articulate the vision more clearly so that I could understand and translate that for the rest of the team. And I think that was
Mm.
when I was at my best. And the one other thing that I
Mm.
would add with the COO role is that I like to think about it as like building scaffolding versus building a building, especially at an early stage company where growth and change is happening so quickly. And so the reason why I like this kind of analogy of building scaffolding is that it's very flexible and malleable, and you can adapt and change on the fly. Whereas if you build a building, it becomes really rigid in terms of the structure. And
Mm.
so everything from how we communicate, so I think about communication architecture, I think about the way in which we make decisions, the way in which we hire and build the team and retain and train people, all these things I wanted to do with a level of conviction and a consistency in terms of building purposeful culture and a team, but also not so rigid where we can't change things as we continue to grow. So those are a few things
Yeah.
that come to mind.
Yeah, there's a key tension, right, between the rigidity and the structure that you really are wanting, and then the flexibility and nimbleness that you need in order to change, especially when your company's growing so quickly and you're a new company to begin with and you're still reading the tea leaves in lots of ways. Yeah. What's been the difference, one of the biggest differences that you've noticed between being COO and being a founder CEO?
So there was a big difference, and for me, it was more about the stage of company versus the roles. Although I imagine the roles are still somewhat distinct and different. The For me, I had joined MeUndies when we were about 5 or 6 people, and so still very much at an early stage. But I would argue we had already achieved quote unquote product market fit in terms of identifying our customer base and having a solid kind of revenue base to kind of build off of. And when I started Panacea, it was very much from ground zero. And so building something from ground zero to product market fit, I think is a totally different game than having achieved product market fit and trying to scale that. And so I think there's other entrepreneurs or even investors who've talked about this chasm, or excuse me, the difference between building something from 0 to 1 and something from 1 to n. And so my oversimplifying, but I think MeUndies was in some ways more like building something from one to N. And that skill set is just different than what is needed to build something from 0 to 1. And I think you can learn both of them, but I think it takes a lot of intention, self-awareness, humility, and just also I think it takes a lot of painful growth as well. So I don't know. I mean, those are kind of some things that come top of mind, but also it just helped me understand too where I'm better suited in terms of those types of roles. And I think going back to what we talked about earlier, I this concept of striding versus striving, I want to, because I'm more in this mentality of striding. If I feel like I'm striving too much, it's an opportunity to learn and see if like, hey, am I playing or working in a space that feels very natural or an extension of myself? And if it's constant uphill, constant like I got to grit my teeth and go through it, that's probably a sign that I'm not operating kind of within the role or the position I was meant to play. And in conclusion, I'll kind of describe it in a sports analogy where it's like, if you have a basketball team and you have a center who is asked and is pulling himself to be like, hey, I need to play on the perimeter and shoot 3-point shots and take the ball off the dribble, whereas they're more meant to be a traditional center operating or playing down in the low post, it's just, you could understand the tension that creates between their skill set, their mentality, and the role that they're trying to play in. So that's kind of something that's come top of mind recently.
Totally. I mean, this is I think of this as like living in your zone of genius, where you effortlessly, easily are creating value using the gifts that you were naturally given, versus living in your zone of excellence, which actually sounds a lot like what you described as striving, where you've worked really hard to learn how to be really excellent at something, but it's the effort feels more hard. It feels more draining. At the end of the day, if that's all you did, it wouldn't be sustainable and you'd burn out. And you can be great in both things, but it's that the ease and flow that's accessible to you when you're doing the thing that you're called to do it frees up so much energy, right?
So I heard this great quote from another entrepreneur named Naval Ravikant, and he talks about how my zone of genius will feel like play to me, but look like work to others.
Yes, totally. And the zone of excellence feels like work that is really rewarding and that you're really good at, but it's so different. So, I mean, so many times I go home from work and I'm aware that there was an output of energy, but also so much energy came in, and I feel I would pay to do my job. I would literally pay. Like if I didn't have access to do this job professionally, which before I didn't, and I actually would pay to do this, I would take time off work and I would meet people at coffee shops. I totally get it. Is that where you're at now? I hope so.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I've been there, but I don't think I understood it or appreciated it as much as I do now.
We sometimes judge and we think, well, if this doesn't feel enough like work, I'm probably not doing it right. I'm not doing enough. I'm not working hard enough.
Yes, that resonates. Yeah. It's kind of this shift toward like, what am I doing wrong versus kind of appreciating it and being really grateful for kind of the situation that we're in.
Completely. Terry, now having been through the number of roles you've played in companies you've been a part of and you've started, what advice would you give someone who's starting out as they're trying to figure out who should my partners be? Who do I want to be on that core founding team with me?
Yeah, I think it really, for me, it's simple. I think it's about finding partners who have a shared vision and shared values, and also understanding that shared vision and values in one area of life may not translate to another. So for example, you may have a best friend or a close family member where you're super aligned in terms of the things that you value within a friendship, within a relationship, how you communicate, etc. But those may not directly translate over to the business world and building a company. And so that's something that has come top of mind for me. And I look at it less like, oh, that person is a bad co-founder or this person is a great co-founder. And I think it's all about fit. And another kind of variable to the equation is timing. I think naturally the stage of life that we're in, it translates to a certain risk profile. And so, for example, if I have kids and I have a wife, a family to raise, that naturally changes my risk profile from when I'm single. And so I think understanding the stage of life that we're in, and as a result, from a macro perspective, the timing of things really kind of is important to consider. And so, of course, I mean, there's other things as well, like around work ethic and just complementary skill sets. And I think there's a litany of things that, probably a checkbox that should just kind of be observed and kind of you should be aware of. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to shared vision and shared values.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. What are some of the things that you've seen others hire for? Maybe they're hiring other leaders or other executives, and prioritizing them over shared vision, shared values that you think should not be prioritized.
For a co-founder?
Co-founder, yeah. Sure, let's start there.
Yeah, I think sometimes I guess a couple of things. One is hiring or partnering with a co-founder who just on paper may look like a great fit, maybe in terms of the past success that they've had, the track record that they've built, but maybe not understanding how it may directly translate to the new business. I think another thing is sometimes we'll get a little too focused on finding the right partner, which again is a very important decision, but lose perspective on what we're going to build together. And one thing I've learned more recently, and it's going to be a staple, it's just going to be the lens in which I evaluate future opportunities, is building unfair advantages. And so you may have the best co-founder in terms of fit and shared vision and shared values, but I think we have to be realistic that building a company, it's a very low likelihood of success. And so if you can build as much unfair advantages in your favor as possible, it naturally makes that journey a little bit easier. And so I think that sometimes gets lost in the mix of like, okay, I'm looking for all these different things in a partner, but just as importantly, how can we as a team embody some type of unfair advantages that give us a greater chance of success than any other team that may be entering this market?
Mm-hmm. What I'd love to talk about the challenge that you just mentioned. So it's very low likelihood of success when you start a company, right? And for many, this brings on, understandably, a lot of stress. Your company's in existential crisis, like almost all of the time. And you truly are really fortunate. Every month that you make it, every month you continue to survive, you're winning. But along the way, and for those who haven't been a founder yet, this is good to note, is that you will be confronted with some of the demons that you thought you would never have to face. Like you thought you were successful in bearing them, ignoring them, maybe you'd worked through them. And I just find it to be one of the most personally confronting journeys that you can ever go on. Has this been your experience?
Yes.
It's the ultimate, it's boot camp for the soul. You know, don't go into it thinking this is going to be really glamorous and it's going to be really easy and I'm going to start a winner and I'm going to win the game, because there is only one way to win the game, and it's to make it till tomorrow. But in the meantime, there are those dark nights of the soul. What advice would you have for a founder who's starting out, or maybe they're in that the trough of despair and they're stressed, they're panicking, they're maybe experiencing burnout, depression, anxiety. What are your tips for staying sane in the startup game?
Yeah, I think it's a great relevant question, and one thing that I'm also trying to navigate. So I don't want to pretend that I have the answers, but a few things that have helped me. I think number one is trying to learn from those feelings and those emotions. And I think for at least in my case, there was this tendency to suppress negative emotions. By negative, I mean sadness, anger, and cling to positive emotions, happiness, joy. And this is something that you and I worked on a lot, is just
Yeah.
not judging the emotion by what it is, but trying to invite it and sit with it and learn from it. And so my immediate reaction to your question about like, what do you do in those difficult times where you feel, and it sounds like you feel these intense emotions that are difficult to process and navigate through. I think the first thing that I would kind of remind myself and others is just to sit with them and experience like the whole journey for all that it is. Because I think those like the way that I've heard it is like the startup journey is like a roller coaster, right? Like so like life, but the lows are very very low and the highs are very very high. And I think that there is this need in terms of maintaining your sanity of trying to be even keel and trying to establish a baseline in which you operate and live your life so that you don't go through these you don't kind of get swung either way too emotionally. But I do think that there is this balance where you do need to kind of feel them to a certain degree, and I think through that feeling you actually learn a lot. And
Mm.
I think through those learnings it helps you navigate that course of like even fundamental decisions around your business of like, should we pivot, should we stay the course, should we hire this person, should we let that person go. And it's amazing what I've uncovered and learned by just kind of sitting with my emotions. The second thing I would offer up is just understanding that it's an infinite game. This is something that
Mm.
I've learned more recently from talking with friends who are also entrepreneurs. But also, I think Simon Sinek just came out with a book called The Infinite Game. And the basic premise, as I understand it, is so much of our approach in our life is dictated by wins and losses, successes and failures. Even what I mentioned before was kind of thinking about it through a finite lens of, hey, with a startup, the chance of success is really, really low. But I think my mentality has shifted from playing this finite game to trying to play this infinite game. And with the infinite game, there's no winning or losing. The only way that you lose is if you give up. The only goal of the game is just to stay in the game. And
Mm.
so if by operating
I have
in
a
that,
question. I have a
oh yeah,
question. So I had to pause you because what do you mean in this case of the infinite game? What do you mean by give up? Do you mean never shutter the business, never pivot? What do you mean?
yeah, no, sorry. So I don't think it means in the sense of like, I think there are moments where you'll have to let go, maybe shut down a company, giving up. I don't think so much in the literal sense, but I think more figuratively of like just giving up on life, and sorry, that doesn't, I don't mean it to sound like this like end to life, but more so just understanding that the outcome, the result isn't a reflection of how I'm doing in this game. It's it's a
Mm.
data point and it just will help me learn and course correct on how I move forward. And so what I've tried to take from this approach or this mentality of the infinite game is that yes, I had to close down my first startup, and by all measures it was a failure, but not beating myself up and pitying myself because it was a failure, but more owning up to it, taking full responsibility, learning from it, and then just moving forward with with a higher degree of confidence and conviction because of the learnings and lessons that I gained from that journey, and just understanding that it'll make me a better leader, better person, better entrepreneur moving forward.
So the business may have, quote, failed, but you are not a failure. And
Yes.
The business closed, but you are not closing up shop.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Terry, you are a sports nut and a big Mavericks fan. Right?
Not Mavericks, but it's all good. We can run with it.
Who is it? What am I getting wrong? Who's your team?
Oh, I like the Cavs. I would say Cleveland.
Cavs.
Yeah.
Cavs. Yes. Okay. And a big Cavaliers fan. And so I'd love to hear your favorite coach of all time and your favorite player of all time and why.
I'm going to say this because he's not known as well, but my favorite coach is this guy named Eric Spoelstra, and he's the current Miami Heat head coach. And the reason why I like him is that he was promoted to become the head coach of the Miami Heat when LeBron James and Chris Bosh joined that team back in, I think, 2010. And he had to learn everything on the fly. And to bring these kind of, egos and superstars together, to get them to buy into the team culture, to get the buy-in of his general manager, who is Pat Riley. He's a Hall of Fame coach, and everyone was saying that Pat Riley should coach LeBron. And there was a lot of, just outside kind of input on how he should coach or approach the role. And I think in that position, being a first-time coach, one could get easily swayed by what other people think, but he just stayed the course and won 2 NBA championships. And even since LeBron has left, they haven't won an NBA championship, but they've built an incredibly consistent team and a destination that a lot of players really want to go to, and a culture that a lot of players want to be part of. So I think that's why he resonates for me as a coach. And then the second, in terms of my favorite player currently, is a guy named Paul George on the Los Angeles Clippers. And the reason why I like him is that he's a two-way player. So he's not, just an offensive superstar, but he is someone who's committed on the defensive end. And I've always I've always admired people who take a holistic approach to their craft and don't want to become great at just one thing or just be one-dimensional. And I think there's this real beauty to having this commitment on the defensive end, which requires a lot of humility as a offensive superstar, because the mentality, you're taught in the NBA to save and reserve your energy on the defensive side or the defensive end so that you can score points on the other end. But Paul George has taken on the responsibility with full eagerness to defend the opposing team's best player and turn himself into one of the best two-way players in the NBA. So that's sorry, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I know, and it's so fun. I really love when you do that. I think I learn a lot about you as a leader when you tell me these things about your observations around sports. So, Lakers or Clippers?
I like the Lakers.
Are you at Clippers?
I like the Lakers. Yeah.
All right,
boom.
Let's go to a game sometime.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, thank you so much for being here today, Terry. It was so great to see you as always.
Yeah, thanks so much, Caneel. I really appreciate it. I've learned so much from you, and I was telling you this the other day, but the lessons and insights that you've shared with me over the past couple of years keep popping up, and I'm learning them, I feel like, on deeper levels. So it's not this one and done thing, but I think this just continual evolution, and one where I think I'll just continue to let it marinate and learn from. So I'm incredibly grateful for you and all that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Seriously. All right. Thank you so much to our audience for showing up today. I trust that you got just as much out of the conversation with Terry as I did. And there's so much more to learn from this man. So we'll definitely share a link to how to get connected with him on Instagram from our show notes at caneel.com/podcast. He's also got some really exciting stuff in the pipe that we did not talk about today because we're waiting for it be time to announce. So I may have him on later on as a guest. If you have questions for him, further questions, please leave them in an iTunes review. If you have not yet subscribed, please give this episode, your vote of confidence by subscribing to the podcast now, giving us 5 stars, leaving some questions for Terry, and please, if you're a fellow Lakers fan, give us a shout out. Let us know. See you next week.